Today's speaker, as I mentioned before, is Kody Russell, the director of Kitsap Strong. And I met Kody as a member of our Leadership Kitsap class of 2016. And he's been one of our favorite speakers during our Healthy Community Day and sharing about ACEs in Kitsap, but specifically around resilience. And so Kody is a well-respected community advocate, and we are just really happy to have him here with us today to discuss his work in helping create a resilient community. So welcome, Kody.
Thank you, Katie. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to just ask you a few questions, and if you can just let us know your thoughts on these. And I think first of all, I'm just curious about what really led you to work in resilience.
Yeah. Well, I think I caught the tail end of this. I don't know. Is this the thing? Reimagine, right? Is this what you guys are doing? Something about this? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think
I'm going to start with
Leadership Kitsap. Like everything we've done this year is reimagine, and I think that's pretty relevant for everybody during COVID.
I think it's especially relevant when we start talking about the word resilience. Is that there's kind of an existing definition within a lot of our structures, within a lot of our society around what resiliency is. And resiliency is kind of synonymous with bootstrap, grit, determination, pull yourself up, overcome. It's this, we focus a lot on the individual components of resiliency, probably to the detriment of even acknowledging how those individual components are built. So when I think about this, like reimagining resiliency, I think now this pandemic is providing us maybe the space and opportunity to really start thinking about what are the conditions that allow resiliency to emerge and to flourish. And our work within Kitsap Strong is trying to create those conditions that allow emergence and allow brilliant solutions to come forward. Because I think that every problem in our community, every complex challenge has a community solution. Like that is how we solve complex challenges. Is that, in the words of Stephen Hawking, right? Like humans, when they talk, have done incredible things. And when we run into problems is when we stop talking. And that we can do amazing things when we're able to connect and talk. And when I think about resiliency, I think about those individual components, but also about the community components. And so what drew me into this work, honestly, Katie, was I'd been working in child welfare for a little over 10 years. And my last job there was as a facilitator for family meetings. And so anytime a child is moving from one home to another in Washington State, we are required by law to have a meeting and develop a plan to make sure that we are providing the best quality care for the child involved and that we're keeping children safe. And in my role facilitating those meetings for about the last 2.5, 3 years that I was with the department, I had the honor and privilege of hearing countless family stories. And so many times I would have a birth parent sitting in one chair who was involved in domestic violence, active substance use, mental health challenges, experiencing homelessness. And next to them was a sibling or an auntie. And oftentimes that sibling experienced similar trauma in their household. But every time we had the conversation, that individual, oftentimes was there because they were going to be placement for the kids. They were going to be taking care of the kids. They were the ones who were going to keep the children safe. And every single time that adult, when we had the time to have the conversation, would say, we had some really challenging times when we were kids, but I had a coach, I had a teacher, I had a mentor, I had a next door neighbor. They always identified someone in their life that saw them, that told them that they were worthy of love, that helped them develop those individual resiliency skills. And so as the father of 2 kids and driving on I-5 after one of those meetings and nearly getting in a car accident, I just started thinking about what happens if I don't make it home? And how does this impact my children? And I realized that it really has very little to do with me. It has to do with you. It has to do with the community of adults that I have created relationships with my kids. Yes, they had their father die, but whether that death actually can impact their brains and bodies in a super profound way is dependent upon, do they have enough other caring, supportive adults wrapped around them to support them and to help them build those qualities that we talk about when we think about resiliency. So for me, it was an acknowledgement that we have always done this in community and that it's through community that we are strong. So.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. I think it's important work, and I'm just so happy that you're at the head of this for our community. And so the spotlight really now is on COVID, like you mentioned. I mean, this is just exaggerating everything. And so, what work is Kitsap Strong doing to promote resilience during this time of COVID?
Yeah, Katie, I think that it's been really interesting. I think if it's all right, maybe I'll share with you just quickly a slide. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
So, get the slideshow to start here. So, I just recently had the pleasure of doing a webinar for our legislators here in Washington State, and we were having this conversation about kind of trauma and resiliency in this time of COVID and what's impacting our community and how are things going. And I started with this cute picture of a pig because baby animals activate a part of our brain that increases our empathy and connection. There's a reason why our impulse is to go, ooh, ah. It's because it's literally activating the neurons in your brain that release those kind of feel-good chemicals. So if you like cute, cuddly little animals, that's because we're hardwired to find and connect with cute, cuddly little animals. If that didn't work, we would probably put our screaming, stinky infant in the river and watch it float away and walk off, right? Like taking care of an infant is hard. So I wanted to just acknowledge, and I'm going to skip a couple of slides here, but when we're thinking about COVID in our community and how it's impacting us, we really started thinking about and acknowledging that this pandemic is impacting all of us, but it's not impacting us all in the same way. And what I mean by that is we're using this model around stress to help people understand what's happening, and then I'll speak to what we're doing right now. So our work within Kitsap Strong has been fundamentally focused on trying to prevent as much stress as possible in the lives of adults. So if we can reduce stress in the lives of adults, that enables them to be, that allows more of them to be involved in the parenting relationship. So we need to reduce as much stress on our parents as possible so that they can be as present as possible with their children, because our parents are our first and best teachers throughout life. And my fundamental belief is that most parents want to do well for their kids and will when they have the community conditions to support them to provide the best possible situation for their children. And I come by that honestly after, hundreds of thousands of meetings with families where I truly believe they wanted to do the best for their kids. They were just struggling because they didn't have a community wrapped around them. So within Kitsap Strong, our goal has been really trying to prevent as much stress as possible, or to take stress from being toxic. So you see unpredictable, severe, and prolonged stress that actually leads to what we call neurological vulnerability. This is not the type of vulnerability that Brene Brown is promoting and is really, really important vulnerability. We're talking about literal neurological vulnerability. So think about it like you're constructing roads in our community. And if you're going to build the best road, you need to lay a good foundation, right? And then but it takes time. We all have had the experience of driving and seeing the main path that we take to work or to the grocery store or something being shut down because they're building the road. But if they do it well, if they invest in the infrastructure and they lay the blacktop well, that road can withstand a lot, and you can build really strong connections there. But if you inundate that road with too much stress, if it's unpredictable, if it's severe, it's prolonged, you'll actually crack and the road will start to crumble, right? And that's the type of vulnerability that we're talking about. So unpredictable, severe, and prolonged stress is the type of stress that there's just really no release valve for. It's just constant every day, and you wake up and you're already here. And so any little thing that goes wrong kind of tips you over the edge, so to speak. So our work within Kitsap Strong during COVID and even prior to COVID has been trying to think about how do we make unpredictable predictable? How do we take severe and make it moderate? How do we take prolonged stress and control it so that we can build the types of neurological resilience that we all need, the type of capabilities? Because life is inherently stressful, we need some of those skills. And so an example of this is when I play board games with my children, we play by the rules. Yeah, sometimes the board game ends up on the floor. Sometimes there's tears, but this is predictable stress. It's moderate. And then we moderate it how? Through relationships. Relationships are the primary way through which we moderate stress. And then we create as much control as possible. And control, it looks like choice. So in a board game, you always have choices. You have options. You have opportunities to make one decision or another, right? Choice is a really powerful part that helps to shift our perspective on the stress. So when we started thinking about this, and we've been administering a fund through the Kitsap Community Foundation, the United Way during COVID, we've been trying to fund work that tries to create opportunities for families to have fun, positive memory building experiences during this time. We try to create experiences where families are doing something together, where we can reduce a little bit of stress if possible. So give them a meal, do something to reduce a little bit of stress from a parent so that they can be as present with their kids as possible. And then create that sense of predictable, that sense of structure. So right now, when we're talking to our schools, the interesting thing is humans can navigate lots of intense stress and pressure if they have a sense of there's an end to this, or they have a sense of control, or they have a sense of choice in it, right? My suffering has meaning. When you have that kind of concept around it. So I think that what we need to do as leaders, and all of you I acknowledge are leaders within our community, we need to create as much structure as possible. We need to, even if we don't know when this pandemic is going to end, we need to say, hey, you know what, for the next 6 months, this is how we're going to work in our business. Regardless of what happens with the caseloads, this is what we're going to do for the next six months so that all of us can plan around that. There's not going to be any changes. This is what we're going to do. If the cases go down, awesome. If they go up, that's unfortunate, but this is how we're going to do our business for the next 6 months. That allows all of your employees to take a deep sigh. I know what to expect for 6 months, not for a week, right? Moderation is about relationship. The way that we reduce the influence of stress is creating relationship and creating opportunities for us to feel connected. That's what's been so challenging, I think, about this pandemic, is that we feel so disconnected because of social isolation. But physical distancing is different than social isolation. So I think, using this sort of Zoom technology, using whatever sort of tools that we have to create opportunities for our employees, for the clients that we serve to feel connected to one another is super important right now, because that is how we as humans navigate crisis. And then the last thing is around choice and control. And I think that one for me is trying to create as many opportunities for people to make a decision and a choice. And so when I'm thinking about education right now, and our schools are thinking about moving to in-person, remote, some hybrid model, I think creating as much choice for every single family is the best path, and not forcing them into one or the other, but enabling each parent and each student to have some sense of control, some sense of choice might help reduce the stress a little bit right now.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Having that opportunity to make a choice. And also, I also like your comment about having a plan, like planning out 6 months and saying, this is how it is. Because I think that does relieve some stress if you know, okay, well, this is just how we're working. This is operating. So yeah, thank you. So how do we, when we're talking about positive leadership, how do we preserve or maintain our authenticity, purpose, advocacy in the face of these inevitable challenges? How do we maintain that? How do we preserve it?
Ooh,
Our choices. So in making these choices, what sort of choices, will help promote that?
Yeah, so I think that when we really think about these types of our ability to kind of manage this stuff, I sometimes think about this idea, and this was from Robin Saigo, who's on the tribal council with Suquamish tribe, and and the director of the Suquamish Foundation, and also just a brilliant, amazing human who's been involved in Kitsap Strong since the beginning. But she talked about this concept, and she uses this idea around a stress cup. And the idea that we all have a stress cup, so to speak, and our cups might be shaped differently, might contain or have a different baseline level of stress, but ultimately, at some point it fills to the top, and we have to have ways to reduce the stress. So when you ask me about how do we maintain right now, how do we continue to persevere in the face of, I think a lot of it is around what are we doing and investing in ourselves right now to make sure that our roots are strong. So I talk a lot about this idea of our community being like a garden and our community being alive, and that just like a garden, all plants need, sunlight, water, nutrients in the soil, but certain plants flourish in different conditions. And what we need to acknowledge is that we've designed our community for certain types of plants to flourish, and some other plants might have never had access to adequate sunlight or to the water that they need to flourish, and that the conditions are slightly different. And I think about that because you don't look at a plant who grows strong roots and say that they're being selfish about investing in deep, strong roots. But so often in our culture today, when you take, quote, self-care, when you do the things to kind of poke a hole in the side of your stress cup to constantly reduce a little bit of stress, going for a walk, taking, a half hour to exercise in the morning, taking a break from your keyboard and getting up and going about, walking or outside in nature, whatever it may be. So often that gets translated into, there's this negative connotation around it. But that is what you're doing when you're strengthening the roots of yourself, right? Deeply, so that you're investing your energy and your resources into growing strong roots so that you can weather the storms that may come. And we also need to acknowledge that as we design this community, because we're all gardeners. Gardeners are the people who have access to the resources, who have control over the resources. So if you have employees that are struggling right now, what could you do? What resources do you have? How could you distribute your resources? Because not all employees may need the same thing. Some employees may need a different thing based on their family situation. They may need a different resources. They may need different situation, different accommodations, and they may need to be encouraged to grow their own roots. And you as an organizational leader can shift that perspective to, this is how we invest in all of us being able to continue doing this work, is that this is about us as a community taking care of each other and investing in ourselves. So instead of self-care, I'd like to talk about staff well-being. And so I think that, we are reimagining everything right now. And I think we are going to develop brilliant, beautiful, amazing solutions when we have the types of relationships and the types of conversations where we start thinking about the current garden, who's flourishing, who is not. What could we do? Have we designed the conditions so that all the plants are getting what they need? Or have we designed the garden perfectly for tomatoes and then we planted a bunch of potatoes? And if our potatoes aren't growing well, right? Like, do we say, oh, the potatoes just aren't trying hard enough, right? Like they're just not working? No, right? Like we don't have that concept. And I think we need to shift our concept around how we think about humans as well, is that having worked with so many of these families, I deeply believe that when we create the soil conditions for every family to get the resources that they need to take care of themselves and their children, most of those families will flourish. And then when they don't, we as gardeners can identify what is it that this family is not getting and how can we make sure that they get what they need so that their children can grow and flourish, because the health of our next generation is really important because they're going to be the ones taking care of us. and I need them to be the best versions of themselves as possible.
Oh, well, thank you. I think like everyone who's participating in this Thrive class is really as part of their building their roots and hopefully able to pass some of this knowledge on to their organizations, because I think you gave us some real concrete ways of how our participants can help weather these hardships, and also some advice for help leading their organizations through this as well. Kody, do you have anything else you'd like to add about Kitsap Strong's work in our community before we open it up to questions?
Yeah, I think appreciate the opportunity, Katie. It's always been a pleasure to partner with Leadership Kitsap ever since I had the pleasure of, I think it was my first year on the job, being encouraged strongly to participate in Kitsap, and it was a really rewarding experience. And I think that what I want our community to know is that our work is not about children; it's across the lifespan, and we support organizations. During COVID, we've facilitated conversations about the childcare crisis, and we've facilitated conversations about elder services and how we taking care of our elders, and literally everything in between. So we really try and take this life course perspective look at our work, and we are still looking for partners and organizations with innovative ideas to support families through this. So there's still some money in the Unity and Community Fund. We paused the application process right now because we were waiting to see what happened with the flu season. Honestly, we were nervous about things getting worse and us wanting to invest some more money when things were getting even more challenging in our community. But we are eager to partner with organizations and to explore ideas to help families navigate this and to help families. I say flourish all the time. It feels like right now we're just hoping to survive. But if we can flourish, then I think that's even better.
Well, that's good. We have several participants today that might be possible partners for you. So
yeah.
So you can hear that. So we're open for questions now. Does someone have something they'd like to ask Kody or comment? It's the Zoom pause.
Kody, what does your organization do exactly? I don't think I've heard of it.
Oh man, that's the hardest question yet. What exactly do we do? So I think and speak in metaphors, so hopefully that works for people. But really what we are, so Kitsap Strong is a network of over 100 different organizations. So when I think about Kitsap Strong, I think of all the different organizations that are involved in Kitsap Strong. But within it, there's also a small team, what we call a backbone team. And we're kind of like the temporary scaffolding that you see along a construction site. So we're not out there doing the work. What we are is we create the environment, the structure through shared language, through communication, through convening meetings, through collaboration and building deep relationships. We create kind of that temporary scaffolding for all the organizations to work together collaboratively and in a deeper way. So we convene a lot. We also act as a funder. So we fund for learning and we're trying to promote trauma-informed care. So we kind of our flagship strategy is something that we call the Collaborative Learning Academy. And we've had 39 organizations and 20 schools participate thus far. And so we take leadership teams from those organizations and we pay them to participate in a year-long learning journey to kind of learn a whole bunch of this science information and then start thinking about how they could make changes to the services that they provide in our community. So that's in a nutshell a lot of what we do. I don't know if that helps clear it up, but most of what we try and do is, so when you think about innovation happens in kind of three ways. Innovation can be thinking about a problem in a new way. So we spend a lot of time trying to change how we think about problems. Innovation can be developing new strategies, and that's what trauma-informed care is all about. Innovation can also be connecting previously disconnected parts of a system. So that's a lot. That's why we spend a year bringing together organizations in our community to learn together, is that we're trying to weave together organizations in a way that they weren't working previously. So, like our library starts working with our juvenile court, or parent-child assistance therapy, PCAP, starts working with Dispute Resolution Center and start a new innovative program for the parents that they serve. So that's kind of what we're trying to do, is to create those types of conditions in our community.
So Kody, I'm going to hop in for a second. So since you've been with Kitsap Strong for the last 4 or 5 years, what have you seen moved? Like, what have you seen changed? Have you moved the needle?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What has changed? We went from 10 organizations to 100 organizations involved in our work, right? Or over 100 organizations involved in our work. So there's lots of little things that have changed. I'll share in the chat here. Probably the easiest thing is I'll share our latest impact report here in a second, and that has some stuff that we call ripple effects, and it's things that organizations within our network have said that they've started doing that were connected to the opportunities that Kitsap Strong helped to create. So we want to be careful about making sure that people understand that when we say Kitsap Strong, we mean all these organizations. So the cool thing about credit is it's infinitely divisible, right? Like we can all take credit for this incredible work because all of us have been involved in it. And so that's the way that we like to think about this. And I'll drop some examples in there. But we had 0 school-based healthcare clinics prior to Kitsap Strong coming along and Peninsula Community Health, not because of our work, but in partnership with all of the organizations involved in Kitsap Strong, has grown to being able to have some school-based healthcare clinics, which obviously are struggling now. But, there's some really cool things that are happening that we're really excited about.
Nice. Thank you. Anyone else have a question or worked with Kody, have a comment? Oh, Emma. Emma has her hand raised.
Thank you. Kody, how can we continue to support our staff's well-being and encourage them to engage in self-care if they are struggling to know what they need? How do we help people who don't have a clear idea about what their good self-care for them looks like?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think a part of it is we need more practice. I think about this concept around self-care is like going to the gym, right? It's like you've got to put in the work and you've got to do it over and over and over again before you start to see the results. And it needs to be just part of something that you're doing. So what an organization can do is they can start to create a structure that create both the structure, but also empower choice so that employees know that this is the expectation, that this is something that we do. So what an organization can do, an example of this was a shipyard up in Alaska, Vigor Shipyards up in Alaska. They had huge challenges with employees becoming injured at work, and they had lots of substance use. And they actually had done some work and identified that a lot of the people working in their shipyard had significant levels of childhood trauma. That's kind of what got them doing this work. But what they started to implement was they set up a structure around self-care or around staff well-being. So they started off their morning routine in the first 15 minutes of every single day. They were doing stretching. And they did yoga, they did mindfulness. They allowed their employees some choice there. Now, at first, these big shipyard workers thought that this was BS, right? And there's a great video, them talking about how they thought this was absurd. But what they did was they just implemented this structure, and this was the expectation. We're going to do this, it'll be 5 minutes every day, 15 minutes, whatever it ends up being for your organization, and explore choice around this. But they said, hey, we're going to do this every single day. And what they saw was a massive reduction in injuries. So even the guy who was saying, this is BS, I don't like doing this, later in the video says, you know what, I haven't been injured at work in the last 6 months. So maybe this stretching thing is working, right? Like I still don't know about the mindfulness thing, but this stretching thing, maybe that's working. And it was this pivot around, we invest in this, all of us together. And as an organization, they carved out the time knowing that they're paying one way or another, right? Like there's a cost of the quote status quo. And the cost is employees, decreased productivity, increased injury, illness, all those sorts of things. So if we invest in this right now, and as a community, we say that this is at an organization, this is so important to us that we're going to say, hey, 10 minutes, whatever it is each day that we're going to invest in this, you may start to help employees explore different things that work for them, right? And I think that you're right. Maybe we need to give them lots of different ideas. The thing about stress reduction is it doesn't work if you don't like it, right? So if you got somebody engaged in something, but they don't like doing it, it's probably not going to work to reduce stress. So, but just like going to the gym, the first couple of days, I didn't like it. right? So you may have to get through that initial discomfort of trying something new. And discomfort is different than dislike. And discomfort is different than, like there's that growing zone where we got to try some new things that may feel a little uncomfortable at first, but might actually really start to benefit us in the long term.
Thank you. We have one last question from John Bass, and then we'll be done. John.
Yeah.
I was just going to give Kody a shout out. If anybody is thinking that they need to get involved or have him get involved with their programs, at least explore it. We started using Kody recently in our crisis intervention training at the sheriff's office, and it's one of the periods of time during that week that I look forward to the most. And Kody teaches us big words like epigenetics, but when you break that down and you learn that your victim's trauma isn't necessarily new, but quite possibly decades in the making, it's really an eye opener, and I think it's helped a lot of us in our jobs. So I really appreciate Kody and thank him for being here today.
Thanks,
Thank you,
John.
And
Always a
thank you,
pleasure.
Kody. It's just such important work. It's been a pleasure having you join us today as we research and discover a little bit more about resilience in ourselves and our community. It's so valuable. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
My honor. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Reach out.